They lied about Antarctica, the secret technology excavated under the ice. The helicopter door yawned open to nothing but white and a row of blue-lit tents where no tents should be. Crates moved in pairs. A loader idled with its lights blacked out. Then the ground shuddered, not wind, something turning beneath the ice. One siren whooped, then died. 40 seconds later, a hard voice on the radio. You were never here. Here's the part they can't scrub. That site sits inside a no-fly corridor that didn't exist last month. Carrier manifests are sealed, and the people drilling aren't glaciologists. If it's weather work, why are they lifting vibration-isolated machines out of a shaft? We're going to do this fast and clean. 4 pillars, 1 spine they don't want connected. First, the forbidden excavations, footprints under the ice that appear, vanish, then reappear 300 kilometers away with identical logistic signatures. Second, the impossible artifacts, precision modules that behave like engineered cores, not eroded junk, shipped in crates that never touch a university loading dock. Third, the geopolitical cover, treaty theater, corporate shells, and a ridicule pipeline that keeps you laughing long enough to miss the paperwork. Fourth, the rewritten history, a design doctrine optimized for cold, pressure, and repairability, resonance first, power second. Urgency isn't a vibe, it's a calendar. 2025-2026 windows are when heavy lifts happen. Satellite tasking stacked over 2 corridors in the last 6 months. Strip map, spotlight, revisit in hours, not days. Freedom of information equivalence across multiple signatories returned identical denials that share the same typo. Meanwhile, ATCM-46 met in Kochi in May 2024, and ATCM-47 is set for Milan in June 2025. Perfect timing for temporary safety measures that just happen to justify exclusion zones. What's at stake isn't folklore, it's energy materials navigation. Whoever owns the retrieval owns the testing. Whoever defines the testing writes the patents. Whoever writes the patents decides whose districts stay lit and whose ports go dark. You can watch a century get drafted in non-disclosure clauses, or you can track it while it's still moving. Why hidden? Because the treaty gives them a velvet rope. Peaceful use sounds noble until the permits only go one way. Search and rescue readiness is a clean label for military lift. Embargoes become selective amnesia. And when you finally pull a thread, someone salts the field with a cartoon fake so you look gullible. Here's the first cliffhanger. One location keeps resurfacing on restricted flight plans, same call sign, same fuel math, different cover destination. Its internal code name changed 3 times in 8 weeks. The ice above it is thinning. Comms go dark at wheels down. A cargo handler heard a crate hum through gloves. What needs that kind of silence? The forbidden excavations, footprints under the ice. Start where engines echo. The sites cluster in 3 kinds of terrain, near subglacial lakes where thermal plumes blur, along blue ice corridors that give wheels a runway on hard crystal, and inside dry valleys scoured to bare ground. On paper, these are textbook field zones until you lay the trails over each other. Dual-use fronts are the tell. A drilling program declares core sampling, then lands a tunnel borer on the same pallet code as a seismic rig. Smart camouflage. Share crane time, share fuel, hide the footprint. You get a science container for show and a retrieval container for work. The noisy generator sits beside the clean tent. The real torque hums underground. Watch the patterns. Seasonal windows open and 3 assets depart different hubs within 48 hours, all with identical cargo headings and redundant blackout orders. Weather's fine, transponder narratives are. Temporary no-fly boxes bloom as safety measures, but the coordinates align with radar anomalies, right angles in reflection fields, voids that don't look like crevasses. In 2025, new subglacial features were flagged across multiple basins. The public map calls them lakes. The procurement map calls them targets. Now listen for the math. Fuel reserves don't match filed runways. A twin turboprop logs a diversion to a strip too short to justify its burn, then reappears with clean numbers like nothing happened. AIS pings from a research vessel hiccup and correct 10 nautical miles east as if the ocean moved. In the same week, a blue ice field grows night retroreflectors no one admits laying. A medevac hops in, lifts with nothing on board, and taxis with lights dead. The fuel truck's volume implies a second aircraft that never hit tower logs. Micro story. A crate gets misrouted to a civilian pier after a storm scrambles schedules. The handler says it hums faintly when the forklift shifts weight. No labels beyond a hazard diamond and a tight temperature range. Two men in unmarked parkas stand on the dock before paperwork arrives. The crate leaves within 30 minutes. The handler's badge stops opening doors the next day. Comms reveal seams. Blackout windows get scheduled across unrelated teams. Data bursts compress at the exact minutes a commercial satellite should be passing overhead. Weather stations go offline in hopscotch patterns that, when mapped, resemble a grid. It's like someone is cutting the light cell by cell. Ask who's on the ground. Personnel rotations carry quiet fingerprints. Archaeology diets on earth sciences. Materials science tucked under ice mechanics, a polite way to study fracture behavior in things that aren't ice. Power systems listed as environmental monitoring. Because a field inverter engineer sounds loud, they cross badge, they keep heads down, they leave on flights nobody tracks. Fuel consumption tells on them. Diesel makes sense until it doesn't. Burn rate drops on paper while generator hours tick up. Solar arrays appear in photos, then vanish in later frames, as if panels were stage dressing, not infrastructure. You don't hide sunlight unless you're hiding what it's powering. Stakes: if this is real, people aren't just coring, they're moving through ice. They're boring tunnels not to collect atmosphere rings, but to retrieve structures. Consequences: our timeline bends. Patent wars jump a century. And the workers on those lines, first to sign silence clauses, last to see what they lifted. Action: bulldozers scar a surface the wind erases. Tents creep. Call signs rotate. A plane lands with a loud story and leaves with a quiet prize. In the middle, someone lowers a frame into a shaft and winches it up with something inside. A lattice module that doesn't rattle, edges that do frost pit, contact pads that look like couplers, not handles. Impact: immediate. Embargoed papers multiply, each with less data than the last. Ripple effects. Procurement swells for specialty foam, non-magnetic structural members, radiation-hardened telemetry. People caught in the wake. A mechanic babysits a crate he can't touch. A pilot flies vectors too precise to be an accident and sleeps badly for a month. A scientist deletes a sentence that would have made her career because the funding letter said so. Parallel action. While that was happening on the ice, a restricted call sign pops up again at 0312 UTC. Same corridor, new code name. The runway is a blue glare that looks like glass. Wheels kiss down, the aircraft goes quiet. You can almost feel the hum under your boots. Here's the one problem. None of this exists if you accept the public map at face value. But overlay restricted flight plans with satellite tasking. Put personnel rosters beside procurement codes. The rectangles line up. The silence lines up. And the footprints, they don't melt, they just move. Timeline shifts when digging turned to extracting. To hear when the mission changed, you have to listen to verbs. Early seasons sounded like curiosity, survey corps map. After the International Polar Year momentum, the language hardened. Instrument, establish, characterize. Then a quiet pivot arrived in the early 200 ones. Procurement annexes and field notes started using a word that doesn't belong to climate work at all: recover. Back when dog teams were still a postcard, the prize was ice itself. Corps were trophies. Stations were measured in liters of diesel and the thickness of a library's worth of logbooks. Even through the 198s and 199s, the point was emptiness as baseline. Measure nothing so future scientists could see change in something. Drills were skinny. Generators were honest. Manifests read like a well-equipped campsite. The inflection arrives when instruments begin seeing through silence. Airborne ice-penetrating radar paints cross-sections like CT scans. Satellite constellations move from weekly to daily revisit. Autonomous under ice sensors trace subglacial lakes and fast channels. The first time a radargram returned repeating voids at right angles, someone drew a box on a whiteboard and circled it twice. That's when map turned into target. Then the private side stepped in. After 201, support contracts stopped saying assist and started saying capability. Long loiter charter aircraft, tunnel borers that don't belong to climatology, barge and tug packages with vibration isolation standard. The public papers thinned, the procurement detail thickened. Transparency gave way to performance. Satellite tasking dovetailed with the hardware. Through 2024 and into 2025, strip map and spotlight modes began revisiting the same corridors in hours instead of days. Weather birds don't need 3 passes over the same rectangle before lunch. A targeting shop does if they're timing a lift between katabatic gusts and an overpass window. Meanwhile, the people changed. For decades, rosters were geophysicists and mechanics who could rebuild an engine with a spoon. Suddenly, archaeology rides under earth sciences. Materials people appear as ice mechanics, which covers fracture, yes, but also how non-ice composites behave under cold, vibration, and load. Power systems specialists arrive labeled environmental monitoring, yet they spec inverters used to tame instrument-sensitive payloads, not pump heaters. The paper trail betrays the objective. Permits kept the poetry, microbial ecology, paleoclimate reconstruction, but the annexes began ordering shock mounts tuned to frequencies more at home in avionics. Foam kits matched fragile assemblies. Non-magnetic structural members turned up in quantities no weather program needs. Someone was planning for machines, not mud. Cadence told the rest. Old-school seasons ran fat in summer, lean in winter. The new pattern swells in shoulder months, staging lifts, laying retroreflectors, sealing routes. You don't drill then unless timing matters. You do extract then if thermal stress drops into a sweet band or if melt threatens access in high summer. There's another tell in silence. Before 2015, graduate blogs were sunsets and cores like glowing swords. After 2015, sunsets without context. After 202, nothing. NDAs arrived with breakfast. Equipment footprints confirmed the pivot. Classic core rigs bring up slim cylinders and live with shavings. The pallets rolling off now? Segmenters with vacuum capture, field ovens that bake moisture from composites without cooking them, diagnostic carts with multimeters you'd marry to an unfamiliar module. In a world of ice, tools for machines. Airframes adapted too. Short takeoff and landing birds still hop samples, but heavier aircraft with side doors and internal cranes became common. LEDAR for mapping became LEDAR plus stabilized gimbals for night approaches. Blue ice runways blossomed like mirages and then vanished in a storm of temporary marker retrievals. Comms discipline tightened. Once bandwidth was a neighborhood, weather bursts, email, a holiday video. Now scheduled mutes align with commercial overpasses. Uplinks go hard quiet for the exact minutes you'd need to spool telemetry off a pallet before wheels up. It's not paranoia when the clock repeats. By late 2024, personnel crossovers between civilian programs and defense adjacent contractors peaked right where satellite rectangles stacked. Overlay the maps and the budgets and the mute windows. They rhyme. That's the timeline. Exploration gave way to survey, survey to prospect, prospect to retrieval. The pivot didn't arrive with a press release. It arrived when verbs changed, when vacuum ovens showed up beside snow saws, when a pilot's manifest said medevac and the fuel math argued lift. If you want the moment, pick the first time recover appeared in a risk assessment. Everything after that was logistics. The impossible artifacts, 12 finds that break the timeline. If the crates aren't rocks, they're machines. You can tell by what gets padded, what gets sealed, and what hums when the weight shifts. The first 3 pieces that slipped description shared one trait. They behaved like engineered alloys, not corroded relics. One slab wore a dull, even sheen that refused frost pitting. A field spectro cart whispered a microstructure too uniform for cast scrap. Its edges met a tolerance as a caliper called beyond cold saw, and when a glove brushed the corner, it rang. A tight, high note that speaks of density, not ice. Artifacts 4 through 6 rewired the question from material to intention. Think a gear train that doesn't announce itself as a wheel. Nested lobed rings with ratios that ignore torque and chase timing. A ring with a step repeating every 223 ticks, the Saros cycle in metal. Another landing at 29.5 with insulting confidence. A third with an oblong slot and pin, the wobble you use to model lunar drift, not lift a load. No grease ghosts, no rust blooms. Just dry precision asking to be set in motion. 7 through 9 live where physics hums. Field hands called them cores, because nobody had better words. Cylindrical hearts wrapped in lattice shells with pads that aren't contact so much as couplers. Clamp 1 between insulated mounts and the crate monitor needles twitch at piezo bands. Tap the shell and the response blooms at specific frequencies, as if the module prefers to vibrate where buildings don't. One core left on foam kept a suspiciously flat temperature overnight while the cabin swung 15 degrees. Energy buffering without cells, or resonance tuned to keep a ride quiet for whatever it powers. 10 through 12 are the frames, the bones that reveal a doctrine. Modular lattice like a truss inside a truss, nodes accepting inserts at right angles so clean you feel silly reaching for a mallet. Shock isolation that lives in geometry, not rubber. Triangulation swallowed by curves that look aesthetic until you put them under load and watch stress run a long way around. The mounts float, not loosely. They settle into anti-vibration nests that would keep a fragile instrument steady in a world that won't stop shaking. Put the 12 together and a pattern repeats. Standardized module dimensions across sites separated by ice and time. Coupler sizes that match. Fasteners that aren't fasteners but quarter-turn locks. A doctrine that prizes field serviceable swaps, pop a resonant core, slide a frame insert, re-engage a timing ring. No inscriptions, no bronze glamour. Just a quiet manifesto, repair beats replacement, stability beats brute force. Why call them impossible? Because metallurgy shouldn't hold uniform microstructures in parts that have lived under pressure for ages. Because tooth counts shouldn't encode lunar irony unless someone owns sky math and ratios. Because piezo-like behavior shouldn't leak out of a core that's been asleep in ice. Because shock isolation this elegant rarely appears outside labs and spacecraft, yet here it is, portable, modular, tuned. Here's the field moment that won't leave. A mechanic was told to crate broken scaffolding. He pulled a lattice piece and noticed 3 scratches in a row that looked like chance, until his fingernail found that each aligned with quarter-turn lock marks. 3 scratches, 3 locks. A visual code you can mark with a glove when light is gone and breath freezes on a seal. That's not myth, that's human. Another detail, module edges carried a faint bluing under lamp like tempered steel, but a magnet barely stirred. Non-magnetic structural members with spring. Composites? Alloys we don't catalog in a field tent. Either way, they were built to ignore compass chatter and keep form cold. Someone thought about noise, too. Timing rings weren't toothed all the way around. Segments held gaps at intervals that match katabatic hum bands logged at nearby stations. You detune a structure the way you detune a guitar string to kill a rattling overtone. Maybe the rings did timing. Maybe they did both time and quiet. The doctrinal sentence writes itself. Resonance first, power second. Make the environment your partner, not your enemy. Lattice your loads, isolate your cores, encode your cycles, functional to the point of elegance. This is where the timeline snaps. We point to the Antikythera mechanism, 30 surviving gears and 82 fragments, a 2nd century BCE analog computer that predicted eclipses, and call it singular. We point to Roman concrete that heals through lime clasts rehydrating in seawater. Damascus blades whose carbon patterns hid nanostructures born of ore chemistry and heat rhythm. Each time we say outlier. But this kit looks standardized. Field modules, swappable parts, timing hardware set by Sky. So when a loader lifts a crate and the temperature doesn't flinch, and a forked driver feels a hum through gloves, it's not a relic. It's a message. We solved the shake, we learned the beat, we left the tools. Your move. The subglacial map, structures, grids, and heat anomalies. To see the city, stop hunting for towers and look for geometry nature hates. Ice likes curves, meanders, braids, lazy S-shapes pressed by wind and time. When a radar swath returns right angles, something else is writing. Start with ice-penetrating radar. A normal cross-section is ribbon noise, layer cakes bent by centuries. Then a pass paints tidy terraces, parallel reflectors, 90-degree corners, repeating voids stacked like rooms. A second instrument chimes the same song. 2 regular for crevasses, 2 repetitive for chance. You're staring at a floor plan wedged into ice. Now trace the melt. Natural channels corkscrew and feather. But along one corridor they run long, dead straight, then turn in elbows that point cardinal, then cardinal again. Overlay a grid and the elbows ride the lines. Spurs blossom at junctions like service laterals. Water obeys geometry, gravity is only the excuse. Acoustics backs it up. Crevasses scatter low and muddy, big voids ring dull. In 3 zones, echoes come back crisp with fixed spacing like ribs, vaulted chambers, pressure hardened, now entuned. The interval doesn't drift. It recurs as if a builder picked a module and kept faith. Thermal is the one that breaks denial. Volcanic heat maps of Antarctica are dull, old news. Yet in 2024 and 2025, localized plumes flared far from known magma, tight footprints, stable, pulsing in narrow bands. The hot spots nest inside the geometric radar fields, not randomness. Sources in a grid, not a grid wrapped around sources. Draw the overlays, radar right angles, straight jointed melt. Acoustic cavities, thermal pins, where layers agree a plan emerges, blocks, corridors, nodes. Long galleries feed trunks set on a 3-4-5 skeleton rotated a deliberate few degrees off north, enough to bleed shear, not enough to look cute. Room arrays repeat in families, squares of 4, rectangles of 6 each with a central cavity linked by narrower throats. That's not geology, that's habit. Watch the closures tell on themselves. Drilling bands appear as kind polygons, fragile ecosystem, environmental caution. Zoom in and they kiss grid lines like a stencil. Weeks later, temporary flight safety boxes bloom directly overhead. A month on, unusual weather advisories damp drones precisely where returns are cleanest. They don't close the ice, they close the map. Micro story. A wildlife drone in calm air wanders a kilometer off plan. Its thermal camera pings a line of hot dots spaced 30 meters apart, marching across a clean field of cold. The dots arc gently and terminate at a rounded rectangle plume. A week later, the firmware updates itself out of schedule. Cache empty. Flight log truncated. The pilot shrugs and flies birds. What breathes heat like that under kilometers of ice? Not a single flare. A network. Distributed cores, long-lived, leaky in the gentlest way. Dots align where corridors cross. Larger plumes sit at nodes. On surface, snow stiffens to a faint spring under boot, as if something brave, regular, lives beneath. There's a layer older than drones. A forgotten analog radar sweep from decades back, dusty, almost useless, escaped a redaction. Digitize, georeference, and overlay it on modern stacks, and the same right-angle fields wink through, softened by age but unmistakable. Different instruments, same grid, they've known. Now the irony, the plan reads like the artifacts doctrine at city scale. Corridors oriented to move water and heat the long way, detuned against katabatic hum. Rooms arrayed in modules that match a quarter-turn lock's arrogance. Nodes like plazas or power spines. The grid's slight rotation matches prevailing wind vectors when the ice sealed, structural axes set to dodge creep. Resonance first, power second. Lattice loads, shock by geometry, maintenance by design. If you wanted to keep this quiet, you'd do exactly what the paperwork shows. Close drilling where floor plans shine. Call it preservation and mean it, preserve secrecy. Redirect flights and label it safety, safe for you, not for what's left of truth. Time retrievals for plume peaks so thermal stress is kind and fresh snow hides the bleed. One last mark on the map isn't a line. It's a void of data, no radar, no thermal, no acoustic, just clean absence in a rectangle. That's not science. That's a locked door. If the hum we felt has an address, it lives there. The geopolitical cover-up. How to hide a civilization in plain sight. Start with the velvet rope. The Antarctic Treaty reads like scripture, peace, science, cooperation. In practice, it's a bouncer's clipboard. Permits are pressure points. If your proposal sings paleoclimate, stamps fall fast. If it whispers structure, void, or thermal anomaly, the letter smiles and forgets to sign. Nothing is denied, everything drifts. Delay is the first layer of silence. Inspection theater is the second. Consultative parties schedule mutual verification. You get a curated tour, fuel drums, a freezer stacked with cores, a lab bench humming. The bus idles while a field zone sits 30 kilometers away behind a polygon labeled environmental caution. Time is read onto your face. Cookies appear. Photos are taken. A communique praises transparency while somewhere beyond the ridge, a winch takes load. Search and rescue readiness is the miracle label. Need military lift for heavy pallets. Paint the plane in virtue. A Hercules touches down in a whiteout, tail yawns and outroll foam cradles and emergency shelters with vibration isolation and shock mounts tuned to avionics bands. Manifests say medical. Line items say machine. If anything goes sideways, the narrative writes itself. We were saving lives. It's hard to FOIA compassion. Corporate shells add a second skin. A materials testing firm registers in a glass box 6 time zones north of the ice. The board lists 2 retirees and a lawyer who skis. It bids to supply advanced field polymers. 3 years later, invoices show those polymers cradle fragile assemblies inside cold boxes. Press asks what the company actually tested. The answer is sustainability. Nobody sues sustainability. Media strategy runs on a ridicule pipeline. See the cartoon leak, laser pyramids under ice, a Nephilim skull in snow. Let it trend. Then when someone drops the boring receipts, permits with identical typos, satellite rectangles stacking over the same corridor, audiences shrug. The serious inherits the clown suit. Editors chase heat, not paper. By the time a sober thread emerges, the platform has moved on. Embargo is the quiet blade. Journals love Antarctica, prestige loves ice. Papers arrive hollowed. Methods redacted for safety, coordinates imprecise to protect ecosystems, supplements in portals you cannot access. Authors are good people, funding letters are better. They remind you that cooperation renews grants and grants keep ships fueled. A sentence that would make your career dies in track changes. Law makes smoke with noble words. Heritage protection reads like a promise. In fine print, protect can mean seize into custodial review, and custodial drifts toward indefinite. A crate with no culture becomes everyone's crate, which means it belongs to nobody you can name. Ask to see it, meet sensitivity. The crate is sensitive. The librarians are sensitive. You are sensitive. Come back never. Cross-border handshake is the treaty's true genius. If 5 flags share a lift and 4 benefit from silence, the 5th learns to love quiet. NDAs go multinational. It's not conspiracy. It's aligned incentives in fleece. The same meeting that commemorates peace sets temporary safety measures that stencil over the grid we drew. You clap for cooperation while the map closes. Micro story. An environmental NGO objects to a sudden closure near a dry valley. Their letter cites microbial stress. Weeks later, the exact polygon appears in a military notice to airmen, coordinates identical to 8 decimal places. Someone copy-pasted the planet. The NGO never learns their protest became the fig leaf for an op. That's how a noble voice gets bent into a key. Psych ops are cheap. A friendly account drops a too-perfect insider photo. Reverse searches explode with fakes, the platform throttles the topic as repetitive misinformation, and the one authentic frame is buried in a grave of mirrors. Meanwhile, procurement hums, transport dampers, non-magnetic frames, cryo wraps. The ledger confesses while the feed laughs. Money is muscle memory. Call it science support, and budget committees nod through line items that keep contractors fed. The same factory ships under 3 names to 3 flags on identical pallets. Oversight changes with elections. Pallets don't care who holds a gavel. You can watch the dollars walk to the ice more reliably than you can track a plane. Data laundering finishes the job. Vendors improve archives, denoise passes that soften right-angle returns, thermal layers baseline adjusted to match volcanic maps. Change logs say enhancement, not removal. Raw feeds sit behind paywalls only institutions can afford. Ask for pre-processed stacks, meet liability. You can rent truth in slices, you cannot own it whole. Inside labs, compliance becomes culture. Young researchers learn which nouns don't end careers. Grid becomes pattern. Void array becomes reflector cluster. Tenure applauds restraint, punishes narrative. The 30-second overlay that would wake a public audience stays on a desktop because nobody wants to be called sensational. Oxygen leaves the room when a postdoc asks why. Even the map fights you. Temporary flight restrictions quilt over corridors, staggered so nothing looks permanent. One expires as the next begins, offset by a hair. Drone advisories cite wildlife stress, then heli crash risk, then solar interference. All true somewhere, none falsifiable here. By the time you stitch 6 weeks of notices, the window is gone. And then the honesty that hides. Agencies publish real science with the context removed. A paper on katabatic wind bands that hum at specific frequencies. Another on ice shelf shear rotated off cardinal. A third on shock isolation geometry in cold environments. Each stands clean. Together they spell the doctrine we found under the ice. Keep them apart and dots never touch. Put it together and the cover isn't cinematic. It's administrative, permits stall, tour perform, military lift wears medical, shells sign invoices, embargo trims results. Heritage law holds the crate, PR salts the feed, psych ops waste your outrage, money moves, software softens maps. Good people keep their jobs by editing gently. Meanwhile, beneath a sky that never sets, a winch takes load, a crate hums, and a voice on the radio says again, "You were never here." The stakes, energy, materials, and civilization-grade IP. This isn't about a museum someday. It's about an operating system for the physical world. Those resonant cores aren't batteries in cans. They're structural buffers that hold and move energy without tearing themselves apart. Translate that, and you get buildings that ride storms in silence, hospitals that don't flicker, grid nodes that don't spike, and vehicles whose frames do the first job of power management before electronics arrive. Whoever patents the doctrine, resonance first, power second, won't sell kilowatt hours, they'll sell uptime. Energy stops being a warehouse at the edge of town and becomes a property of the structure itself. Imagine surgical theaters where the walls damp vibration at the bands that blur hands. Deep ocean instruments fed by frames tuned to slow thermal swings. Orbital buses that shrug day-night cycling because their bones route heat the long way around. If a core can keep temperature flat inside a swinging cabin, your cable runs shorten, your peak demand drops, and blackout math changes. That's value you don't meter. It's value you never lose. Materials are the next blade. Non-magnetic structural members with spring and frost immunity rewire sectors that hate corrosion and stray fields. Aviation, medtech, quantum labs, fusion halls. If a lattice can isolate shock by geometry, not rubber, you ditch consumables that fail in the cold. Add modular nodes with quarter-turn couplers and you redesign maintenance. Swap an insert, not a beam. The world spends trillions fighting vibration, fatigue, and thermal creep. This kit treats them as starting conditions, not defects. Then the metrology buried in those timing rings. If tooth counts encode lunar cycles, you're staring at timekeeping that survives denial. No satellites, no spectrum. A sky-locked ephemeris in steel isn't nostalgic. It's resilient navigation when GNSS goes dark. Maritime insurers will pay for vessels that carry a mechanical fallback. Militaries won't say it out loud. They already mandate it in procurement. The doctrine pins time to nature, not infrastructure you can jam. Urban engineering is the scale that scares treasuries. A grid rotated a few degrees off north to bleed shear isn't a curiosity. It's a city plan. Corridors that persuade water to travel the long, cool path. Nodes that leak heat into design sinks. Districts that don't cook, flood, or vibrate themselves tired. If you own the simulation stack that translates resonant doctrine into code, you don't sell drawings. You sell permits and performance guarantees. Municipal bonds will price those curves into interest rates. Now the ugly part, civilization-grade IP. Heritage law says what's recovered belongs to everyone. Patent law says the first to file with enabling detail wins. The treaty praises science, procurement writes contracts. If a contractor characterizes a lattice insert to fight katabatic hum, their claims stand even if the geometry seed came out of a crate. Courts won't ask whose ancestors built it. They'll ask who reduced it to practice. Expect a forest of filings. Mount isolation assemblies, resonant cores, thermal routing frames, designed to fence the commons before press conferences. Standards bodies will be too slow. If labs replicate a core's behavior with new materials, they'll publish reference specs and ship dev kits. The market will treat those PDFs as law. Once tooling spreads, correcting mistakes takes a generation. We've seen this pattern with encryption and codecs. The first clean version wins a decade. If the clean version bakes in secrecy, the public buys silence wrapped as reliability. This is where it touches your street. A school retrofitted with resonant frames stops needing expensive acoustic fixes. An ambulance bay built on a detuned slab keeps imaging gear stable in a winter gale. A data center that routes heat along long paths cuts cooling load during peak prices. The invoice doesn't say ancient doctrine. It says reduced maintenance, lower insurance, guaranteed uptime. You pay for calm because chaos is expensive. And here's the real leverage. The doctrine scales down better than it scales up. A quarter-turn lock is the same in a hand-sized insert and a 10-meter node. A timing ring that encodes cycles works in a wrist core and a district spine. That makes it hard to contain. If one clean open design slips the fence, 1,000 shops can build it. If the first clean design lands behind NDAs, your city rents silence forever. So the stakes aren't just who files first, they're who defines default. If resonance first becomes the unspoken baseline for energy, materials, navigation, and cities, the winners won't sell parts. They'll lease certainty. Everybody else will keep paying for noise. The rewritten history, a civilization that shouldn't exist. To understand who laid that grid and tuned those cores, don't start with myth, start with weather. Antarctica isn't always a lid. Interglacials opened coastal corridors, brief windows when shelves thinned, valleys went blue, and inlets breathed. In those bands, a maritime people could move, build, retreat, and return with the rhythm of water. Not wheat and walls, wind and ice. Engineers at the edge, reading sky like scripture and pressure like law. Their fingerprints aren't murals. They're ratios and habits that ignore borders. The same 3-4-5 rotation we saw under ice appears where builders solved stress without language. Layouts that slide a few degrees off cardinal to bleed shear. Galleries that detune against known hum bands. Rooms stacked in modules sized for hands, not emperors. It's the Antikythera impulse made architectural. Celestial cycles encoded in teeth and spacing. Timing locked to sky because clocks fail, stars don't. Call it a ladder without coal. Start with resonance. If you learn to store and move energy by tuning structures first, frames that refuse fatigue, cores that prefer safe bands, you can buffer heat, smooth motion, and calm loads before you ever chase dense fuels. Add field serviceable geometry, quarter-turn locks, modular inserts, and your tools survive cold and panic. Navigation follows, mechanical ephemerides that re-zero by heaven-turned fog into timetable. The doctrine scales from wrist to corridor without changing its verbs. Maritime fingerprints keep showing up where ships never docked. In the Andes, megalith joints kill rattle by geometry, stopped inner corners, interlocking tongues, stress running long instead of straight. In Ireland, passages catch solstice light like a timing ring made of stone. On the steppe, tumuli hum at human voice bands. Different latitudes. Same first principle, survive by singing with what wants to shake you apart. If you learned that doctrine under katabatic wind, you'd teach it with stone where the sea can't reach. This isn't diffusion by empire. It's convergence under pressure. People facing cold, quakes, and bad wind build the same solutions when they honor resonance, not brute force. The grid under ice looks like a city that took those principles to their natural end. Corridors that persuade water along detuned paths, nodes that leak heat into designed sinks, modules you can swap with gloves on. Not pretty, durable. What about collapse? It doesn't read like catastrophe, it reads like planned retreat. Quarter-turn locks exist for panic. A culture that encodes cycles in metal would recognize when ice turns hostile. You decouple, seal the rooms that survive pressure, park energy where it stays quiet, and leave anchors the sky can find. The rest becomes doctrine, portable habits more robust than inscriptions. When the water returns, so do the crews who can still read it. So where are their books, buried in practice? A civilization that worships maintenance doesn't carve speeches, it trains hands. It leaves preference curves, not manifestos, detune before reinforce, slide before brace, root heat the long way, fix without fire, encode time in teeth, mark locks with scratches you can feel. That's why the echoes are ratios and modules, not names and gods. Function was the story. The rest was weather. Skeptics want one smoking monument. They're looking at it. It's just under ice instead of sun. The map we drew isn't geology's casual joke. It's a floor plan that repeats at scales humans choose when they fight entropy with harmony. And the kit we keep catching, cores that hold calm, frames that refuse rattle, timing rings that trust sky, reads like a field manual. When everything shakes, tune first, power later. Now the part that stings. If the doctrine survived as a trail of habits, stone that hushes, bridges that breathe, pigments that glow where eyes can't see, then we've been walking past their library for centuries, mistaking indexes for ornaments. Roman concrete heals because a recipe found a resonant chemistry. Polynesian navigation works because minds became instruments. The pieces weren't miracles, they were local implementations of one quiet sentence. Why shouldn't exist? Because our curriculum prizes loud leaps, steam, volts, bits, and dismisses quiet revolutions you can't meter on a billboard. A civilization optimized for cold and repair would leave almost nothing we teach. No conquests to memorize, no capitals to argue over, just systems that keep working when memory fails. We call that impossible because our stories need crowns. Here's the wager buried in the ice. Either we're watching coincidence with perfect posture across continents and centuries, or a maritime culture refined a survivable theory of matter, scaled it to a city, and walked away on purpose. If that's true, the most human part isn't the grid or the gear. It's the choice to leave tools that teach by doing, waiting for hands that can hear them hum. Echoes around the world, corroboration from impossible sites. If the doctrine is real, resonance first, power second, maintenance as theology, you should see its fingerprints far from ice. Not copies, not myth echoes, solutions that rhyme under different skies. Start where stone learned to hush. In the Andes, walls at Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo don't just stand, they breathe. Inner corners are stopped, never true right angles inside joints, so cracks don't initiate. Faces interlock with tongues and recesses that redirect stress the long way around. Tap a seam and you don't hear chatter. You hear a dull settle as if the wall prefers quiet. That's shock isolation by geometry, not rubber. It matches our frames. Triangulation swallowed by curves, rattle killed before it starts. Cross the sea to Ireland's Newgrange. A passage aimed at the winter solstice sends a blade of light along a tunnel to a chamber, not for spectacle alone, but timing fidelity. That's a stone timing ring, cycle encoded in architecture, resonant with our metal rings set to lunar math. The trick isn't light, it's repeatability under temperature swings and centuries of heave. Detune the mass, fix the cycle. Rome's harbors whisper chemistry in the same accent. Concrete piers still harden underwater because lime clasts rehydrate and grow new crystals in seawater, knitting cracks shut. Self-healing as design, not luck. A maintenance doctrine that outlives memory, identical in spirit to a core that holds temperature flat inside a swinging cabin. Keep the ride quiet, Let the material repair itself in service. At Chavin de Huenter in Peru, galleries steer sound into low standing tones that settle bodies together. Priests blew conch trumpets, the harmonics did the rest. Architecture tuned to frequencies humans feel in ribs. That's the same move our city grid makes at scale. Orient corridors and mass so the wind's hum bands don't shake the bones loose. Control resonance, behavior follows. Shift to grease for the machine in bronze. The Antikythera mechanism, 30 surviving gears and 82 fragments, predicts eclipses with smug precision, a 2nd century BCE analog computer tying cycles to teeth. It's a pocket version of the doctrine's spine. Encodes sky and hardware so timing survives outages. Our rings carry the same idea into cold. The math does care which century cuts the teeth. Travel to Polynesia, where instruments live in mines. Wayfinders cross oceans without compasses, holding star lattices, swell signatures, bird arcs, and cloud colors as one integrated ephemeris. Frames are canoes, resonant cores are people. They damp chaos by training attention to the planet's beats. It's maintenance of cognition, the doctrine turned inward, hum with the world and you won't shake apart. Now listen to pigments that refuse time. Egyptian blue glows in near-infrared as if it stored a piece of sun, a calcium-copper silicate tuned to emit where eyes can't see. Maya blue locks organic dye inside clay cages that resist acid, humidity, and centuries. Materials as messages, stability by intelligent microstructure, not brute coatings. Our non-magnetic members with spring feel like their cousins. Urban plans echo the grid under ice. Angkor didn't just stack temples. It tuned water with barrays and canals that buffer monsoon violence, long paths for heat and flow, detuned against collapse. Teotihuacan's avenues and drains route storm loads with geometry that refuses rattle. You can see the same slight rotations away from cardinal when loads demand it. A city that breathes beats a city that breaks. In the Bolivian Altiplano, Pumapunku's andesite blocks carry cuts with millimeter tolerance and modular interlocks. H shapes that assemble, disassemble, and reassemble like stone dev kits. Precision plus maintenance. Swap the unit, not the wall. Our quarter-turn locks and inserts are that logic made explicit in metal. Look at bridges that seem too light but last. Inca rope spans retuned yearly, fibers replaced on a cadence embedded in ritual. The hardware is humble, the maintenance is sacred. That's our doctrine again. Permanence lives in service intervals and modularity as much as in mass. Even the quiet math repeats. At Göbekli Tepe, pillars enclose spaces aligned to cycles, not kings. At Stonehenge, low frequencies focus inside the ring. Speech clarifies within, blurs without. In Roman vaults, coffer patterns shed weight without surrendering strength, like lattices that root stress away from danger bands. Everywhere you look, the same principle keeps surfacing. Don't fight the environment, compose with it. Skeptics say pattern hunger makes cousins out of strangers. Fair. So run the harder test. Identical problems solved with the same verbs under different materials and myths. Detune first. Root forces long. Encode time in rugged forms. Standardize modules for swaps with tired hands. Those habits don't need boats between cultures. They emerge wherever the planet shakes and people refuse to crack. Which is the point? The kit under ice isn't an alien language. It's fluent in a human one we forgot to teach. Maintenance as meaning, resonance as ethics, geometry as care. If a maritime culture refined that to its cleanest sentences and built a city from it, of course its grammar leaks into other literacies. Stone, pigment, water, ritual. The echoes aren't copies, they're agreements. The suppression playbook, how they keep you from connecting dots. Start with the simplest choke. Split the evidence so nobody's paid to overlay it. Fund melt channel teams here, acoustic void teams there, flight notice admins in a third building. Each publishes within scope. Coordinates fuzzed, timing masked. Reviewers enforce tone. Avoid cross-domain conjecture. You become excellent at fragments and illiterate at the picture. Funding levers do the polite work. Proposals that say grid stall. Instrument bias correction flies. Cross-discipline budgets, exactly what would align radar terraces with blackout windows, die during efficiency rounds. Travel vouchers misplace themselves in shoulder seasons, the only weeks that matter. Meanwhile, single subject output pads metrics. Careers depend on narrow sightlines. Credential gatekeeping handles the rest. Journals sand sharp edges before you reach the methods. Void becomes heterogeneous reflector. Right angles becomes anisotropy artifact. Conferences accept your abstract, then slot you at 8:00 a.m. on the last day in a parallel room beside penguin guano flux. Colleagues smile in hallways. Committees forget your name when the vote lands. Legal smokes drift under green banners. Heritage reads like a shield until temporary custodial control extends in 90-day increments you cannot appeal. Sensitive ecosystems justify polygons that overlay the very rectangles the radar drew. FOIAs return commercially confidential algorithms for vendor preprocessing, exactly the layer that softened the right angles. You're given the box score, not the ball game. The ridicule economy does bulk discount. Dump a neon hoax on Sunday night, laser beams under ice, CGI monoliths, and let TikTok bury nuance. By Wednesday, debunkers mop up. By Friday, when a pilot posts a clean NOTAM quilt with matching blackout windows, the platform auto-suppresses for repetitive misinformation. The true thread dies in the undertow created to drown it. False flag leaks salt the well. A real thermal overlay gets cloned, rotated, and timestamp poisoned 100 ways. Reverse image tools now return fakes first. Fact checkers, paid by the click, bounce off noise and declare the topic unreliable. The one honest frame becomes radioactive by association. Curiosity learns not to touch the stove again. Data laundering finishes the trick. Enhancement passes denoise away the very crispness that made the terraces unnatural. Baseline adjustments force thermal plumes toward volcanic maps, not measured reality. Change logs never say removal. They say standardization across archive versions. Raw streams sit behind institutional paywalls with export controls. Students trying to replicate the anomaly discover the subscription tier where it disappears. Inside labs, soft compliance becomes culture. Senior authors red ink verbs that imply intention. Built becomes appears. Aligned becomes coincident. The most dangerous thing you could do, draw a clean overlay, turns into a career hazard called storytelling. A postdoc learns to bury the grid under an appendix nobody downloads. They keep their job. The picture dies a small, polite death. Procurement fog hides bones in synonyms. Shock mounts are transport dampers. Resonant cores become test cylinders. Non-magnetic frames read field scaffolding. The invoices are public. The semantics are private. Ask for part numbers, meet a subcontractor with a mailbox in a tax haven and a lawyer who replies, proprietary geometry. You can see the shape by what they refuse to name. Maps fight you with kindness. Temporary flight restrictions stack in staggered quilts no single screenshot can capture. One expires as its sibling begins, shifted a kilometer. Drone advisories rotate reasons. Wildlife stress, heli risk, solar interference. True enough somewhere to be unassailable, unfalsifiable here. By the time you stitch 6 weeks of notices, the corridor window is over and the runway scraped clean. Platforms algorithmically train you out of attention. Threads that stitch satellites to flight plans earn borderline flags for pattern speculation. Accounts posting overlays eat soft bands, discoverability throttled, embeds refused. Meanwhile, high sugar fakes farm watch time. The audience learns the reflex. Antarctica equals circus. That's the pipeline at work, ridicule as an immune system. Finally, the honest truths, published without context, become decoys. A paper maps katabatic wind bands that hum at fixed frequencies. Another quantifies ice shelf shear rotated off cardinal by a neat handful of degrees. A third details shock isolation geometry optimized for cold. Each stands clean. Together they shout the doctrine, detune first, root long, maintained by design. Kept apart, they remain facts without consequence. This is the playbook, divide evidence. Reward shards, legalize drift, weaponize laughter, standardize away edges, rename the parts, quilt the airspace, throttle the curious, publish truth in pieces. Then let the calendar do the rest while the ice covers tracks and the crate leaves at dawn. How do you beat it? You don't go louder, you go reproducible. Fix your nouns, timestamp your stacks, mirror your raw, hash your overlays, chain your receipts where a takedown can't break them. Pair every plot with one human moment a platform can't auto-moderate. Most of all, keep the picture whole. Because the thing they fear isn't a claim, it's an alignment. The breakers, leverage points that crack the seal. Start with the tool nobody can embargo, open source sensing. The first breaker is cadence, not glamour. Build a volunteer stacks group that aligns satellite passes by look, angle, and time, subtracts baselines, and publishes overlays with hashes. No screenshots, reproducible stacks only. Strip map, spotlight, thermal, whatever the constellations can see today. When a rectangle breathes on and off across weeks, you pin it. When a blue ice runway blinks into existence and then dissolves under a marker retrieval, you have receipts that survive platforms because the method is public. Mirrors in 3 jurisdictions. Hashes posted before the first view. Second breaker, logistics choreography. AIS and ADS-B are habits, not truth, so track the habits. Build watch lists of tail numbers, hex codes, crew rosters, engine types, and fuel curves. Flag diversions to runways that don't match burn math. Cross-check with public fuel invoices at coastal depots. Fuel doesn't lie. Pair ship pings to satellite tasking windows. When a research vessel drifts 10 nautical miles every time a corridor goes dark, you plot the drift as a confession. Publish timelines that stitch ocean, sky, and runway into a single clock the ridicule pipeline can't dissolve. Third breaker sits in small labs. You don't need a crate. You need residue, vacuum bag dust, glove smudges, stray shavings rescued from a shop bin. Pre-register a blind protocol across 3 independent materials labs: microstructure, magnetism, and piezo response. Milligram samples, pre-hashed chain of custody, negative results published as proudly as positive. If a fleck hums at specific bands under light tapping or stays suspiciously non-magnetic with spring, you don't yell artifact. You publish behavior and method. Doctrine lands as physics before it lands as myth. Fourth, legal sunlight. Treat the treaty like it's yours. File inspection requests keyed to search and rescue readiness when military lift moves medical pallets. FOIA equivalents that anchor to timestamps and typos. When 5 denials share a misspelling, a judge wants to know why. Demand pre-processed data under procurement terms. If a government paid for denoise passes that softened right angles, that's a public record. Tie polygons that close, environmentally sensitive zones to matching NOTAM quilts. 8 decimals, not vibes. Courts don't like copy-pasted continents. Fifth breaker is narrative in the boring sense. Receipts chained in plain view. Build narrative pods with 4 chairs. A pilot, a mapper, a rigger, a writer. 1 micro-story per pod, 30 receipts deep. Time stamps, hashes, mirrored raw human stakes. Here's the crate, here's the hum, here's the fuel math, here's the email I wasn't supposed to keep. No neon metaphors, no CGI pyramids. Sober, repeatable pictures that any editor can print without losing a job. You're not chasing virality. You're building stickiness that survives an algorithm's bad mood. Sixth, procurement cartography. Crowdsource part numbers off blurry photos, bid portals, and accidentally public spec sheets. Translate euphemisms, transport dampers, field scaffolding, test cylinders, into shock mounts, non-magnetic frames, resonant cores. Map vendors across shells to factories. Publish a component registry, dimensions, materials, coupler sizes, compatible threads. When 3 nations order the same quarter-turn insert with the same rubber-free isolation nest, the commons seize doctrine in purchase orders. Seventh, standardize the method before they standardize the patents. Convene a public resonance first frames workshop across structural, power, and metrology folks. Output isn't a manifesto, it's test bands, bench setups, minimum reporting standards. If the first clean reference is open, filings that build fences must argue why secrecy improves safety. Open standards don't stop patents. They set the floor so cities don't rent silence forever. Eighth, season matching. Their lifts run on calendars, shoulder windows, katabatic lulls, satellite gaps. Match cadence. Schedule releases to bracket overpasses and TFR quilts in near real time. If a corridor breathes 3 times a day in January, your overlays breathe 3 times a day in January. Not to chase them, to keep the clock honest while the runway exists. Ninth, sanctuary mirrors. Host archives in 3 legal climates, 2 continents, 1 offline vault. Bake redundancy into process. 2 friends who can run the stacks if you disappear. A lawyer who knows how to argue commercial confidentiality. Doesn't cover denoise kernels. A lab that will publish a null. Decentralization isn't romance. It's why a takedown email doesn't end a method. 10th, teach the quarter turn. Build 3 public demos that embody the doctrine without a single crate. A footbridge that detunes its own shake. A desk-size resonant buffer that keeps a chamber flat through cycling heat. A clinic room frame that rides local wind bands. Open BOMs, open test data, open failures. Let mayors touch silence before vendors lease it to them. We don't win arguments by saying ancient. We win by making calm obvious. Last, humility as armor. Mark speculation as speculation, receipts as receipts, and methods as gifts. Every 30 seconds, ask if what you're showing can be rerun by someone with no stake. If the answer's no, cut it. The playbook we're up against counts on heat. Break them with cold procedure. Boring, repeatable, mirrored, and human enough that a humming crate isn't a metaphor. It's a sound you can feel in your glove. The message in the machines, what the design doctrine teaches. Strip the romance and sit with the hardware long enough and the kit starts talking. Not in symbols or myths, through choices. Every edge, every gap, every quarter turn lock repeats the same sentence until you can't miss it. Tune the world before you push it. Resonance first. Power second. Maintenance always. Begin where the fingers learn faster than the mouth. Those frames didn't fight vibration with rubber. They buried isolation in geometry. Triangulation swallowed by curves, so stress takes the long road. Nodes that cradle inserts in nests that float just enough to dodge the nasty bands. That's not a trick. That's a worldview. If you can get noise out of a structure before it becomes force, everything downstream gets easier. Energy storage, metrology, even navigation. From resonance, the ethics of power fall out clean. You don't design for peaks, you design for continuity. That core that kept temperature flat inside a swinging cabin, that's not a battery. It's a buffer that makes wild inputs gentle. Translate that to a city and you stop chasing bigger plants. You route heat the long way and let the grid breathe. Translate it to a clinic and you can steady a surgical hand without making a checklist for silence. Power becomes stewardship, not spectacle. Modularity is their second commandment. Quarter-turn locks weren't indulgence. They were respect for failure and time. Hands in gloves, light gone, breath freezing, 3 scratches for 3 locks and an insert slides free without a prayer. A system that expects fatigue and plans a kind path back to function is a system designed for people who are scared and tired and still need the thing to work. That's not ancient, that's merciful. Sustainability wasn't a slogan for them. It was geometry plus chemistry acting like a conscience. The lattice that reroutes crack initiation. The timing ring that drops teeth where the wind wants to sing. Pigments that glow where eyes can't see but refuse to rot in rain. Roman concrete healed because lime clasts rehydrated in seawater. Our frames heal because the nasty bands don't live here anymore. Different materials, same move. Make the environment recruit to your side. Then the cognition baked into hardware. Timing encoded in teeth so a sky can re-zero an instrument without spectrum. Locks readable by a fingernail. Couplers that obey human reach, not a CAD fantasy. It's a toolkit for bodies, not just brains. A person can feel whether a core is seated. A pilot can hear whether a frame has settled. We keep calling that primitive because there's no screen. It's the opposite. It's interface without translation. Anti-fragility stops being a buzzword and starts being the way the parts breathe. Structures that improve under small hits, joints that tighten where quake bands live, corridors that prefer to flood gracefully along planned throats rather than tear a city. You don't get that with redundancy alone. You get it by accepting disturbance as teacher. Every module invites stress at safe scales so big shocks arrive to a tuned choir, not a startled room. What does the doctrine ask of us now? Measure the hum before you propose the fix. Build frames that answer wind, then let electronics whisper. Distribute storage inside structure so energy lives where loads live. Stop paying interest on spikes by banking continuity in bones. A footbridge that detunes its own shake is a better generator than a loud box on a pole because the first job is to keep people calm. Scale doesn't ruin this. The quarter turn in a hand-sized insert behaves like the quarter turn that seals a 10-meter node. A timing ring on a wrist core obeys the same sky as a district spine. That's what scares gatekeepers. Once a clean, open reference lands, shops don't need permission to build calm. That's why procurement hides nouns. They don't want defaults to go gentle against noise. The doctrine also rewrites how we think about smart. We've trained ourselves to worship feedback loops that blink and beep. Their loops were slower, quieter, more honest. Materials that informed by behavior. Geometry that told the truth about stress. Procedures that encoded humility, check the sky, feel the lock, listen for the band. Their smartest object might have been the training that taught hands to hear. There's a civic sentence here, too. If you build districts that don't cook or rattle or flood themselves tired, you change what a city argues about. Insurance prices silence into bonds. Permits become performances instead of promises. Maintenance is no longer a cost center, it's culture. The doctrine makes care legible. That's the kind of technology we keep pretending we can buy as an app. You can't. You build it into bones and teach it forward. And here's the uncomfortable mirror. We already rediscovered pieces in isolation. Self-healing concrete, wayfinding that treats minds as instruments, alloys that refuse corrosion by composition alone. We celebrated each as miracle, then forgot the sentence that would have tied them together. Tune first. If the kit under ice is anything, it's an invitation to stop treating calm like a luxury and start treating it like law. So the message in the machines isn't a boast. It's a set of manners. You enter a world that hums and you choose to sing with it, not over it. You design for tired hands and scared eyes. You plan for failure as a regular visitor, not a scandal. You encode time in forms that won't lie when networks do. And when the storm comes, and it always comes, you don't need a hero, you need a quarter turn. False ending, what if we're too late? Here's the fear nobody puts in a funding brief. The ice doesn't care about our calendar. Blue ice windows lengthen, melt threads nibble at corridors, and context, the one thing that turns metal into meaning, slips first. A quarter-turn core without the frame that seats it becomes trivia. A timing ring with no sky index is jewelry. Split the pair and doctrine downgrades to puzzle. Corporate haste doesn't wear a skull. It wears fleece and calls itself translational research. A lab announces a breakthrough in structural energy buffering that looks like a resonant core in thermoplastic. A startup patents geomass decouplers suspiciously close to those rubber-free nests. Meanwhile, a crate's trip report reduces a lattice to field scaffolding, and the field notes that explained orientation get harmonized out of a metadata migration. Data rots cleaner than steel. An archive migrates. File names lose rotation metadata. A checksum breaks on the one radar swath where terraces ran crisp. A procurement portal deprecates a line of invoices the weak transport dampers tripled. What survives? Screenshots and memory. Screenshots don't meet chain of custody, and memory doesn't meet peer review. 5 years on, a graduate student pulls the improved stack and wonders why the grid drifted. The answer is a missing column. Shoulder seasons flip from asset to threat. A node's throat warms wrong, pressure cycles go noisy, a hurried lift tears along a path the designer tuned to bleed gently. The crate still leaves, but inside is a lesson nobody will publish. Impatience converts salvageable doctrine into shards and NDAs. The after-action calls it weather. The truth is schedule. Then the human leak you'll never read as a paper. The field hands who felt the hum retire. The tactile knowledge, how a true quarter-turn resolves under glove, how a detuned frame goes quiet when it seats, doesn't live in accelerometers. If you don't teach it by doing, it dies. Instruments can record bands. They can't transmit nerve endings. The false victory looks like progress. A press conference stages a gleaming mock-up that demonstrates the principle. A photogenic ring chirps under a benchtop shaker. Headlines crown ancient green tech reborn. 2 quarters later, filings harden. What used to be a sentence you could learn with a wrench becomes a sealed module with a license. Cities end up renting silence the way they rent bandwidth. Micro story. A pilot filmed a pallet unload in a whiteout and kept one still. 3 tiny scratches next to a lock, a glove tapping once, twice, thrice before twist. He posted it to a private drive. 2 weeks later, the link returned violates content guidelines. The video wasn't spectacular. It was worse. It was useful. If that's the slope, what's left? Triage. Preserve context faster than product. Mirror scans with rotation metadata intact in triplicate in places takedowns can't reach. Teach a dozen small labs to map resonance bands honestly. Publish failures and frequencies, not hype. Build a public registry of module dimensions, coupler sizes, scratch mark vocab before they become trade secrets. Every shared notation is a rope thrown backward in time. Then prototypes that can't be fenced. A footbridge that detunes its own shake with a bill of materials a school board can read. A desk-sized thermal buffer that keeps a chamber flat during cycling heat, instrumented and open. A clinic room frame tuned to local wind bands, installed with the facility's team, not a mystery vendor. Receipts over revelations, repairs over reveals. Cadence matters, match their windows. If corridors breathe in January, publish overlays in January. If NOTAM quilts stagger by a hair, post stacks by a hair. Not to chase them, to keep the clock honest while the runway still exists. Call the doctrine what it is, manners in matter. Teach the quarter turn before you trademark it. Show the scratch code before it becomes a logo. Put the timing ring in a classroom before someone puts it behind a badge. We don't need a monument. We need hands that can hear the hum. And humility. Don't crown the kit with legend. Don't burn it in spectacle. Treat it like what it was built to be, a way of keeping life steady under bad weather. If we do that quickly, too late can become on time in the only sense that matters. The next tired person in a cold room finds the lock by feel, twists once, twice, thrice, and the world goes quiet enough to work. The next 12 months. Here is how we turn hum into method, month by month, with jobs anyone can grab. Months 1-2, build the watch list. We'll publish an open sheet that tracks corridors, tail numbers, hex codes, ship call signs, engine types, and fuel curves. You add sightings, diversion logs, and runway lengths. Cadence matters, UTC stamps, not vibes. If a transport files medical into a strip too short for its burn math, it flags itself. Months 2-3, Stand Up the Stacks group. Volunteers trained on open satellite workflows, strip map, spotlight thermal, scripts align look angles and subtract baselines. No screenshots, only reproducible overlays with hashes and mirrors. 3 jurisdictions, 2 formats, 1 method anyone can rerun. If a rectangle breathes, we pin it. Months 3-4, Cross Lab Bench. 3 independent university shops pre-commit to blind protocols, microstructure, magnetism, piezo response. Milligram samples only, chain of custody pre-hashed, nulls published as proudly as hits. If a fleck hums at a band, the plot lands with methods you can copy. Months 4-5, Legal Front. File inspection requests tied to search and rescue readiness when military pallets wear virtue. FOIA equivalents keyed to typos and timestamps. Demand pre-process records when public funds bought enhancements that softened right angles. Judges like clocks, give them clocks. Months 5-6, Procurement Tree. Crowdsource euphemisms into parts. Transport dampers to shock mounts. Field scaffolding to non-magnetic frames. Test cylinders to resonant cores. Build a registry, dimensions, coupler sizes, compatible threads. When 3 flags order the same quarter turn insert, doctrine is in the cart. Month 6-7, Narrative Pods. Small teams of 4, a pilot, a mapper, a rigger, a writer. Each pod tells 1 micro-story with 30 receipts, timestamps, hashes, mirrored raw, plus 1 human moment a platform can't auto-moderate. Sober, reproducible, printable. Month 7-8, Rotation School. Train 10 more people to run the stacks and 10 more to teach. Scripts plus walkthroughs plus a failure gallery. Sanctuary mirrors, archives hosted in 3 legal climates, 1 offline vault. If someone disappears, the method doesn't. Months 8-9, City Bench Demos. Build 3 open prototypes, a footbridge that detunes its own shake, a desk-sized thermal buffer that keeps a chamber flat through cycling heat, a clinic room frame tuned to local wind bands. Publish BOMs, test bands, and negative runs. Let mayors touch calm. Months 9-10, Standard Seating. Convene an open, resonance-first frames workshop across structural, power, and metrology folks. Output, minimal reporting standards, bench setups, and safe test bands. If the first clean reference is public, filings start from our floor, not their fence. Months 10-11, Season Match. As corridors breathe, our stacks breathe. Overlays posted in near real time, bracketed by overpasses and TFR quilts. Not to chase them, so the clock stays honest while the runway exists. Months 11-12, the Under Ice Report. Release a citable annual with datasets, methods, procurement maps, and legal outcomes. No neon, receipts mirrored and boring the way truth survives. Roles, map code, verify, file, build, teach, fund. If you've got an hour a week, adopt a tail number. If you've got a shop, offer bench time. If you've got reach, lend it to the pods, not the circus. The quarter turn has to be taught. The line in the ice. The lie was never the ice. It's the story that told you nothing human could survive beneath it. If this doctrine is real, it asks for hands before headlines. Subscribe if you want the stacks, the methods, and the builds as they land. Watch the companion deep dive next. We stitch the global echoes to the polar spine and put the quarter turn in your hands.